Putin News Now. To aid in Ukraine's rebuilding efforts, Japan will establish a liaison system. The long-awaited counteroffensive by Ukraine against Russia's invading forces has finally begun. In an effort to reclaim occupied territory, Kyiv has launched attacks in the south and east of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam in Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine has worsened conditions on the ground, forcing the evacuation of thousands. According to Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar, 8 settlements, including the village of Piaty-Katki, have been freed by Ukrainian forces in the past 2 weeks of offensive operations. After 2 weeks of offensive operations in the Berdyansk and Melitopol directions, Maliar announced on Telegram that 8 settlements had been freed. To aid Ukraine in its reconstruction efforts after the Russian invasion, Japan has agreed to set up a liaison system with the Eastern European country. A memorandum of understanding for the Reconstruction Support Initiative was signed in Tokyo between the Japanese Minister for Reconstruction, Hiromichi Watanabe, and the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, Alexander Kubrakov. In response to a request from Kyiv, Tokyo plans to share lessons learned from Japan's recovery from the devastating 2011 earthquake and subsequent tsunami with the Ukrainian capital. Russia's chances of success in its invasion of Ukraine have been severely diminished by its numerous strategic and military missteps. However, this does not mean that it is losing the geopolitical war to expand its sphere of influence, especially in the former Soviet bloc, which includes Georgia. The United Nations claims that Moscow turned down their offer of assistance to those living in areas flooded by the collapse of the Kakhovka Dam. Russian officials reported 35 deaths in Moscow-controlled areas after the dam broke on June 6, releasing floodwaters across southern Ukraine and Russia-occupied parts of the Kherson region. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry reported 17 deaths and 31 missing people. More than 11,000 people have fled their homes on both sides. A senior Ukrainian government official told Reuters ahead of this week's summit that Ukraine is seeking up to $40 billion to fund the first part of a Green Marshall Plan to rebuild its economy. Beginning on Wednesday in London, politicians and financiers will discuss the country's short-term funding issues and long-term reconstruction efforts. Rebuilding Ukraine is projected to cost $411 billion, or 3 times the country's GDP, according to the World Bank. Nikkei found that Japanese semiconductors are still making their way into Russia. Nikkei obtained Russian customs data and analyzed import records from February 24, 2022, to March 31, 2019, and discovered more action is required to prevent the indirect flow of goods that are evading sanctions in this way. Explore further by reading on. Nikkei also reported in April that despite the U.S. government's ban on exports to Russia, American-made semiconductors were making their way into the country through trading companies in Hong Kong and elsewhere. As of June 12, the UN reports that Russia has, so far, declined our request to access the areas under its temporary military control, following the June 6 collapse of the Kakhovka Dam. UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine Denise Brown issued a statement urging the Russian authorities to act in accordance with their obligations under international humanitarian law. As a result of the dam breaking, civilians have been cut off from their usual supply routes. African leaders who had hoped to mediate the Ukraine conflict were cut off by Russian President Vladimir Putin, who explained why he thought many of their proposals were misguided and poured cold water on a plan that Kyiv had already largely rejected. In Russia and Ukraine, the African leaders hoped to secure consensus on a package of confidence-building measures. Russia's commitment to Africa was emphasized by Putin as he opened talks with African leaders in a palace near St. Petersburg. Participants included delegates from Senegal, Egypt, Zambia, Uganda, the Congo Republic, Comoros, and South Africa. But after the presidents of Comoros, Senegal, and South Africa made their presentations, he cut in to question the plan's foundational assumptions, which were based on the acceptance of internationally recognized borders.